Trans influencer Dylan Mulvaney finally spoke out about the fallout of her partnership with Bud Light. On Thursday, she posted this video on TikTok. Let's watch.
What transpired from that video was more bullying and transphobia than I could have ever imagined. And I should have made this video months ago, but I didn't. And I was scared, and I was scared of more backlash, and I felt personally guilty for what transpired. So I patiently waited for things to get better. But surprise, they haven't really. And I was waiting for the brand to reach out to me, but they never did.
In the video, Dylan Mulvaney recounted the backlash he faced, including being ridiculed and followed, adding that Bud Light has yet to reach out, which Mulvaney says far outweighs not working with trans people at all. Let's listen.
For a company to hire a trans person and then not publicly stand by them is worse, in my opinion, than not hiring a trans person at all, because it gives customers permission to be as transphobic and hateful as they want. And the hate doesn't end with me. It has serious and grave consequences for the rest of our community. And you know, we're customers too. I know a lot of trans and queer people who love beer, and I have some lesbian friends who could drink some of those haters under the table.
Bud Light's parent company, Anheuser Busch, fired back against Mulvaney's claim Thursday, telling the Daily Beast they are committed to all of its partnerships, which have spanned decades across multiple communities, including the LGBTQ+ community. Now, Jessica, I have my own issues with Dylan Mulvaney and particularly his presentation of what it means to be a woman, but I actually agree with him on one point, which is that if a brand is going to partner with a transgender person, they should stand by it. I think it makes it quite clear that a lot of these corporations are just giving lip service to certain ideals of what they think is politically popular or what could potentially help their environmental social governance ratings, rather than what they actually believe in.
Yeah, I definitely think Bud Light should have stood by Dylan Mulvaney, because this was very clearly a ploy made by their marketing team to get to a consumer base that they don't have right now, younger drinkers. And if they don't get to that base, they're going to see the demise of a company that is already in decline. So by hiring her to be the face of Bud Light during Pride Month, and then when they get this backlash to then leave her high and dry, it makes me think even less of Bud Light now than when they didn't speak out against all of the hateful things people were saying. And so really awful rainbow capitalism, showing that they don't really care to make a stance on social issues at all, which I wish the people who spewed all of that hate and threats towards Dylan Mulvaney and the transgender community as a result of this ad campaign, I wish those same people realized that this was not the corporation taking a strong stance on an issue. This was the corporation trying to sell products to a generation that is not buying them. It was never really a decision that they made because they care so much about the social state of our nation. It was a decision they made to sell beer. But still, if you're gonna make that decision, support the woman that you chose to be the face of the campaign. It's that simple. And the fact that they didn't is really sad to hear. And I think she did a great job speaking about it in a larger context and placing it in a larger context for people, rather than this is a personal battle between her and Bud Light, as a lot of influencers do when they have bad relationships with the brands they work with. I think she did a really good job.
Yeah, it's very clear that Bud Light found itself caught in the middle of two disparate consumer groups, and instead of taking a side, they thought that they could just stay in the middle, and that ended up making it worse for them, because shortly after the backlash to the Dylan Mulvaney custom can, as well as some of the paid advertisements on Instagram, Bud Light responded to their sales plummeting and their stock plummeting by trying to cut this very Americana patriotic ad that really rung hollow to a lot of the people who were criticizing the brand, because it felt like, again, they were paying lip service. And then on the opposite side, they received backlash from the LGBTQ community because they didn't ever speak out in support of Dylan Mulvaney. So I think this is a good lesson to brands. If you're going to take any kind of stance on a political issue, then you have to be prepared for what follows, and you have to stand by it, because if you try to remain in the middle, once you take a stance, then you're going to come across as disingenuous.
Yeah, and now the consequences, they've lost all consumers or perhaps not all, there will still be people who like Bud Light and will always drink Bud Light. When people like a product, they'll buy it. I think that should be the extent of the consumer economy, by the way. I don't think you should be able to get more consumers simply because your ads get into people's brains and you manipulate their psychology, which is something that Edward Bernays has been trying to do and making a science of by a coincidence. He's the nephew of Sigmund Freud. These are people who have really dedicated themselves to propaganda. He's the man who decided to sell cigarettes to women and was so effective at psychologically getting in women's brains that his wife pulled out a cigarette from the bedside table and he ripped up the pack and was like, "Don't you know these things are bad for you?" Advertising defining demand rather than people being rational consumers in the market is the state of capitalism in the United States. And I don't think that's an effective economy when advertising is what drives consumption. I think if people like Bud Light, they should drink it. I don't think corporations should make a stance on these issues. And the consequences of it is precisely this: nobody wins.
Right. I think brands should let their products speak for themselves. If you deliver a quality product, that should be enough to convince people to shop with you. And unfortunately, now it's pretty much impossible for brands to remain politically neutral because of how much consumers now say that they actually want brands to weigh in on social issues. You end up basically creating a divisive economy, an economy where you have different brands trying to market to different consumers based on their political leanings. And I don't think that's healthy for a democratic republic. I think we should try to keep these political debates to the political sphere, because once you start using brand decisions and product purchases as an additional marker of what your politics are, you're going to start noticing that among your neighbors, among your community members, and it's going to rip people apart. I just don't see how brands getting overtly political in any fashion across the board, rather than remaining politically neutral, is good at all for inclusivity and for people loving each other and respecting each other in their communities. It just seems like it's going to be inherently divisive.
Yeah, and as someone like Dylan Mulvaney, who I'm sure makes a large proportion of their income on ad revenue, I think all influencers should be considering the impact of the brands that they work for. The other controversy in the influencer TikTok world is that Shein trip. I don't know if you saw. And the same kind of controversy, it goes in the other way as well, where influencers will come under fire by supporting companies with unfair labor practices. And I think rightfully so. I think that direction of, expressing your political opinion to influencers and not being supportive of them supporting companies that have really unfair labor practices and making them seem like everything's fine. And actually, if you criticize Shein, it's xenophobia. I think that kind of criticism is merited. But sometimes you have people who are influencers who have made their lives dependent on that income, and they have to take that brand trip. And instead of being mad at Shein or being mad at Bud Light, we're now mad at people like Dylan Mulvaney and the influencers who went on the trip instead of holding corporations accountable, right? We have an economy where we can regulate these corporations, and corporations having this, as defined by the Supreme Court, personhood, I think has consequences and has been dangerous for many reasons. Should corporations have free speech when they have this much control over our labor power and economy? I think that's a valuable question to ask.
Definitely, and I agree with a lot of the criticism of Bud Light for the Dylan Mulvaney partnership for reasons we've obviously discussed on this show before. But another reason that Anheuser-Busch deserves criticism is that they moved a lot of their manufacturing overseas, taking away jobs from working class Americans, and that's one of the reasons among many that I prefer some other beer brands. That's it for us today. Jessica, do you have any major July 4th traditions that you love to do?
Yeah, just going to celebrate the fall of British imperialism over the United States.
You're such a nut. I love it. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share so you never miss any content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we are now available anywhere you listen to podcasts. All right, Jessica, that's it for us today. Have a wonderful Independence Day, or for you, I guess, independence from the imperial regime.
Thank you, Amber. You as well.